Hey everyone, welcome to Mindful Mindsets, and today we have an old Buddhist story. So this story is about a man named Joe Bloggs. He was born in England and he was destined to become a Buddhist monk. Never an A student, but never failed, always coming right in the middle, always being middle of the class. His teams went 500 in his sports leagues, so when he discovered Buddhism, he decided he had to become a monk. So he traveled to Asia to become a monk in a famous monastery where these monks had all kinds of special powers. And they named him Ajahn Majhima, which just means middle teacher. So he was so happy being in the middle way, and right after he joined, a bunch of other monks joined, so he was right in the middle. He wasn't a junior monk and he wasn't a senior monk. And he loved that because the senior monks had all kinds of responsibilities. The junior monks were always complaining about the senior monks because the senior monks got the best cushions and they got to eat first. And he was just so content being in the middle way. So the senior monks had all kinds of powers. They could predict the future, they could levitate, they could read people's minds. But all Ajahn Majhima had was pragmatism. He just went in the middle way. But after the decades rolled on, he started becoming more and more senior. But he wasn't worried because the second monk in command was younger than he was. So when the abbot was dying, the most senior monk, he thought, well, I'll be second in command, but I'll be okay. I don't need any of those special powers. And later on, the second monk, he disrobed, he fell in love. And now the abbot was dying. And when the abbot was dying, he said, Ajahn Majhima, you are going to have to take over this monastery. And he was so distraught. He thought, how am I going to take over this monastery? I don't have any special powers. The only power I have is to be in the middle, to be average. I don't have any of these abilities. And the abbot said, with his last breath, he said, you will find those powers. You will predict the future. You will read people's minds. You have it in you to be the abbot of this monastery. But Ajahn Majhima knew that he didn't have any of these powers. He didn't really believe the other monks did either. But he found himself as the abbot of this huge monastery. And he was responsible for all of these monks and some of the villagers. He had to take care of them. So as fall approached and winter was coming, he decided that he would have the monks gather extra firewood, just in case the winter was a little colder than normal. So he had them work a couple extra hours, get enough firewood just in case the winter was colder than it usually was. But still worrying because he didn't have the powers of foresight, he wasn't able to predict the future, he decided, you know what, my power is pragmatism. I'm going to call the weather service. I'm going to ask them what the winter is going to be like. So he called the weather service and he talked to the meteorologist and he said, so what is the forecast for this winter? Is it going to be mild? Is it going to be moderate? Or is it going to be severe? And the meteorologist said, well, I'm glad you called me because it's actually going to be a colder winter than normal this year. So Ajahn Majhima, armed with this information, went back to his monks and said, we need to gather some more firewood. So they went and they worked and they got some more firewood. And now he thought that they were ready for the winter. But again, being a pragmatist and being worried about making sure that everything was right, being conservative, being extra cautious, he decided to call the weather service again. And he asked the weather service, what's the winter going to be like this year? The meteorologist said, well, I'm glad you called because it's going to be even colder than we expected. We've just gotten in some new information and it's going to be colder than we ever thought. One of the coldest winters in decades. So Ajahn Majhima took that information back to his monastery and he had the monks gather firewood for days. They went crazy gathering firewood just in case this was a super, super cold winter. They would have enough firewood for anything. And so he felt content for a while, but then he thought, you know what? I'm going to call one more time just to be sure. So he called the meteorologist back and he said, what is this winter going to be like? And the meteorologist said, I'm so glad you called me back. It's going to be the coldest winter on record. Colder than any winter since 1880. It is going to be the most freezing winter, the most severe winter we've ever seen. In fact, it may be the most severe winter we've had in the several thousand year history of this country. And Ajahn Majima thought, oh my God, how am I going to tell my monks this? I'm supposed to be able to predict the future. I'm so glad I called this guy. And then, just making sure that the science was sound, he said, how do you know that it's going to be the most severe winter on record? And the meteorologist said, well, the monks in the forest can predict the future, and they've been gathering more firewood than they ever have in the past. Sometimes this story is called the stock market or the economy. So I just like this story. I think it's a funny story. I don't know if there's any morals we can take from this story, but I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.